me be your king. And this song is for how you make me feel when I'm holding your hand. Oh, my baby, you should be with me.
Whatever it is, we're not in no way minimizing or diminishing the severity of that conversation. But, you know, the Yorubas say when an issue is so serious, the only thing that you can do is cry. You just laugh. Because sometimes some of these things are just laughable. The fact that some people will even come up with such things. Let me say it the way Yoruba say. Ọ̀rọ̀ tó bá ti ju ẹkún lọ, ẹ̀rín láàrin, as in, it's so heart-rending, you just laugh. And it's not laugh of it is funny, it's a laugh of it's not funny. But you know what?
So you want proof of ownership too? Because you have one already.
Absolutely. You know, something that is also not funny is the level of infrastructure gap that we have. Over time, we've had, I think it was Mr. Babatunde Fashola who said at some point in the previous administration that our infrastructure gap is so wide, we need to spend, or was it the vice president? We need to spend between 10 and 15 trillion naira every year for 15 years to get over that. And you know, Mr. Ben Akabweze also in May this year said, for us to be able to fix the infrastructural needs of the country, we need to be spending about $100 billion annually. Ooh. So there's some correlation there as a country, including private spending on infrastructure. Of course, Mr. Ben Akabweze was Director General Budget Office of the Federation. The president also on inauguration said, we shall continue the efforts of the Buhari administration on infrastructure. Progress towards national networks of roads, rail, and ports shall get priority attention. And so that one was also there. And of course, a number of other things go in that direction. So what do we need to do? What are the things you need to know in the area of reviving the economy through infrastructure development so that you might be able to follow the news and possibly, you know, lend a hand into nation building yourself? Joining us for this conversation is Fagbule, who is Deputy Director and Head of Financial Advisory Services, Africa Finance Corporation. Thanks for joining us this morning, Mr. Fagbule. Well,
thank you.
I can also say, okay, would you also say you would probably also say it's not funny, right? Because even though you're smiling, people would not, it's not really, you know, a funny scenario that we have on our hands. But, you know, last year you wrote, great news, a transformational bridge and a seaport, two of the most high-profile infrastructure projects in the recent history of Nigeria, are in their final stages of completion. Yesterday, the Lekki Deep Sea Port received its first transshipment vessel, while the second Niger bridge has also been completed. So, talk to us why for you these two stand out among others, and what people need to know about why it's important and what they can leverage.
Thank you very much for having me, sir. You know, I did listen on the prior conversation. I'm not smiling because it's funny, it's because what else are you going to do? You know, the Lekki Port project and the second Niger Bridge project, I wrote about those last year because I do think that those are incredibly important and transformational projects for Nigeria. They are the kinds of projects you know, many different types of infrastructure have been built in Nigeria in the last, 8 to 10 years. But of all of the projects that got done, I would say those two stand out in terms of their economic importance, their importance in terms of being important arteries that connect one piece to the other. In the case of Lekki, the east coast of Lake to the rest of the world. And in the case of second Niger Bridge, obviously connecting the eastern part of Nigeria, the second artery across the Niger. So they're important in terms of the commercial viability of those projects, the amount of economic activity that will be spurred by having those projects in place. They're important because of the amount of competitiveness, the improvement in competitiveness of companies and businesses and traders and individuals who require infrastructure to move their goods from one place to the other. So in terms of the jobs that will be created, in terms of the industrial activity that will follow, I think those are two incredibly important projects for Nigeria.
Mr. Fagbule.
Please, would you just tell us what kinds of reforms need to take place, especially in the maritime sector, to ensure efficiency?
So, maritime, it's extremely important. Is the key word, right? The key goal has to be competitiveness. If you look at all of the ports in the world, all of the cities in the world that are dependent on ports, and the way that ports are generally managed across the world, it is a highly competitive area of business. It's very important, and by competitive I mean in terms of the ultimately the cost to the user of the infrastructure. It's very important for those costs to be driven down as much as possible, as aggressively as possible over a long period of time. The cost, the throughput of goods, the volume of throughput, the speed of throughput, the safety of throughput, just generally quality of services that customers experience. It's extremely important to improve that aggressively over a long period of time because it's a highly competitive business. And it's so fundamental to determine the cost of goods and services in an economy. And so, what does need to be focused on in the Nigerian maritime sector is how do we aggressively improve competitiveness? What are those barriers to competitiveness within the ports infrastructure and the ancillary infrastructure connects to the ports? What are those that are inhibiting competitiveness, and how do we reduce those and improve competitiveness overall? I can get specifics on what that means, but that has to be the key word.
What are your comments about the fact that Lagos and Tinkan Island ports seem to be the only ports that are working optimally in Nigeria? There are other ports. Why are those ports not in use maximally?
Why are the other ports not in use maximally? Yes, it goes to the point about competitiveness, right? So you need ports where vessels can call safely, they can call regularly, they can discharge their cargo quickly, turn around and go elsewhere. And this is how the entire global shipping business is designed. So shippers want to be in and out as quickly as possible, and they need port facilities that allow them to do that. So to the extent that a port is not providing that service, that kind of service, the right kinds of vessel, the sort of larger vessels that are mostly now applying the international waterways, it will be difficult for it to attract cargo from shippers, and ultimately that's why Lagos continues to be the port that attracts the most cargo. Shippers want to go there because that's where they're getting the best deals in terms of what the shipping lines are offering. So what needs to be done happening now is partly what's happening now is creating a new, like Lekki, which is the global international standard facility that will attract the kinds of shippers that folks who want to ship goods work with, and will ultimately attract that cargo. And everything needs to be done to make that port internationally and regionally competitive as it can possibly be.
Mr. Fagbule, we're talking about infrastructure here. The high traffic of trucks to the Lagos ports have damaged other infrastructure that should actually help in progressing their businesses. For instance, look at the roads all leading to Apapa Port. I mean, what kind of infrastructure is that when trucks have to park on the roads and park on the bridges for days on end? They are damaging other infrastructure. What advice, because you need the ports working optimally and you need the roads as well to be able to move the goods from the ports. I hear you talking about efficient clearing of goods at the port. So they've cleared their goods efficiently. They're now moving their goods out of the port, but they cannot get to where they're going because their activities have damaged the other infrastructure, the roads. So what advice would you be giving so that we have efficiency at the ports as well as good road infrastructure to move the goods coming in or going out for that matter?
Yeah, I mean, what we actually need is rail. So ideally, most of those goods should be evacuated from the port by rail. And there is a rail connection into the port in Apapa. That connection needs to be strengthened, is to be operational, put into effect, because the roads will always be insufficient for the volume of traffic that we're talking about. I mean, the ports are extremely inefficient at the moment, and they are not even serving, a sufficient percentage of the traffic that Nigeria command if it was operated at, the full capacity of what the country is capable of in terms of productivity. So clearly, roads cannot handle that volume, and it's unusual in most parts of the world for huge volume of that nature.
Well, interestingly, I mean, growing up in Lagos, I don't know if you would also recall that I didn't remember having so many trucks on the roads. However, the railway system was very, very active in the 70s into the 80s. So a lot of cargo was freighted through the rail lines as opposed to the roads. But hey, perhaps that's why also the former president, was talking about his administration doubling the stock of Nigeria's infrastructure to GDP by over 40%. And they also talked about the recommended ration being 70%, which appears to be the fact, which appears not to be enough. So for you, and looking at the debt profile that Nigeria is contending with now, and the expectations of Nigerians, especially for a living wage, as the president has promised, looking at also the need for infrastructure development, how difficult is to get a balance?
I mean, it is challenging, but it's not impossible. Nigeria has limited resources. That is the reality. Most countries in the world have limited resources, and Nigeria is not different relative to the size of the population, relative to the demand for infrastructure across, all sectors: electricity, roads, bridges, heavy industrial infrastructure, rail lines, gas pipelines, and so on and so forth. There is huge demand for infrastructure in Nigeria. The government has limited resources and will always have limited resources. And so the trick that has worked in most parts of the world where significant growth has happened from the infrastructure stock is that you have to attract private capital into infrastructure. And that is an area where not enough effort has been put, I think, in Nigeria. I mean, Lekki Port is an example of a private sector initiative that has been extremely successful. And it's the evidence that the private sector can, if well marshaled and well motivated, can contribute significantly to the stock of infrastructure in the country. Certainly in the last 8 years, that has not really been maximized in terms of that capacity. And that's a lot of what needs to be done going forward. So private capital needs to be brought in order to achieve that. Any number of incentives that need to be provided, and a strong focus also needs to be put into macroeconomic stability. because it really can't have long-term infrastructure financing where inflation is at 22% as you have it today. It will be simply impossible for anybody, no matter how well-meaning or how interested in profit they are, to sustainably provide infrastructure in an environment where inflation rates are as high as 22%. So, macroeconomic to bring those rates down, not only in the interest of the average human in Nigeria who simply can't afford to continue to buy goods and services at that level of inflation, but also in the interest of the infrastructure providers as well, who are looking to put money to work in building projects. They simply can't successfully do that when inflation rates are so high, where exchange rates are so unstable. And so these are some of the things that need to be done to get that balance right.
Well, it sounds more challenging than reassuring, but perhaps also more contentious or difficult is the electricity challenge. There are some data would quote that on the average, it should be 1,000 megawatts to 1 million people. And Nigeria right now is anything close. We understand that in Egypt, I'm not sure what the population is, but it's definitely not as much as Nigeria. They generate something in the region of 59,000 kilowatts of electricity, and South Africa has 58,000 megawatts. And Nigeria, I don't even want to quote the figure. So, to put the question straight to you, and because it is something we've been contending with over time, and it is a very, very significant infrastructure, can Nigeria break the power supply or electricity chinks?
Absolutely. And, you know, electricity is fundamentally an organizational problem. I've written about this as well and published. You know, it is very important to understand that electricity is an organizational problem. There's no technological challenge with having safe, sustainable, sufficient electricity for everybody in Nigeria. There's no particular commercial challenge to do it because it's been done in countries poorer than Nigeria, and it's being done in countries with larger populations than Nigeria. So there's no logistics challenge. There's nothing that needs to be invented. What does need to happen is that Nigeria needs to be better organized. And by better organized, I mean in terms of how we govern our affairs. Electricity is the sector that does not really lend itself very much to disorganization. And if you like most people that one thing that Nigeria is well known for is being disorganized. That the lack of electricity is the symptom actually of that bigger disease, if you like. Now, one of the things that I am particularly excited about is the amendments to the Constitution that happened towards the end of the last administration, and then the Electricity Act, which has been signed into law by the current president. And the reason I am particularly excited about these is because they do give us a chance to attempt another approach at organizing ourselves in the area of energy. Particularly given state legislatures, 26 state legislatures, the opportunity to innovate and to come up with local solutions for electricity supply within their jurisdiction, within their territory. I do think that this is the once in a lifetime opportunity for states to take charge of their local reality and say, how do we put in place the laws, the regulations that attract investment into building smaller size capacity for our needs and resolving the electricity supply issues within our boundaries. This was an opportunity that did not exist before for state legislators to take that lead and for state governors to innovate and to find solutions at the state level. That opportunity is now there, and I think you're going to see a lot of movement from some more serious states to achieve this very quickly, to innovate, to come up with regulatory frameworks that are different from the federal arrangement, and that aim to attract investment into the energy supply areas that are available within that state, available within the state, and meeting the demand by dynamics of the citizens and businesses within each of the states. So I'm very optimistic that we have a better organization structure that is evolving for electricity in Nigeria, right? And that will therefore see outcomes.
But does it concern you? Does the debt profile, is it something significantly concerning in the light of the infrastructure gap?
It is, it is a concern. I mean, if you look at it from obviously from the important point of debt to revenue, or debt service, I should say, to revenue, for Nigeria as a whole and for most of the states in Nigeria, it has been exceedingly concerning for anybody monitors those numbers. I think that this is the reason, more than anything else, why the subsidy removal was so imperative, because it was essentially a choice between a bankrupt country and a country that was still able to afford those subsidies. So it's extremely worrying, but I think that there is a window of opportunity for this to be resolved. But it has to be a collective, and I think most Nigerians agree, has to be a collective effort at sacrifice, at avoiding some of the mistakes of the past, and charting a new path forward in terms of fiscal responsibility and in terms of how the affairs of the country are organized. The subsidy was the biggest item on that list, but there are many other items that need to be rectified across the board in order to have a fiscally responsible government that is able to then operate, raise capital, borrow, which it still needs to do, and provide services that are so critical for the average Nigerian and for competitiveness for the Nigerian business.
Mr. Fagbule, we're fast running out of time, so let me just run to this topic, which is very, very important in our infrastructure development and also poverty alleviation, the issue of power. Do you think we can break this power jinx? They say that we have installed capacity of about 12,000 megawatts, and Egypt has 59,000 and South Africa 58,000. Those are our rivals in Africa. We can only boast, we say we have an installed of 12, even though we can only distribute approximately 5 out of it. In fact, sometimes it goes as low as 3,000. And without electricity, we can't have any important growth, development, and that also translates into taking people out of poverty, because if they have electricity, they can do a little business here and there.
Yeah, so I think the first thing to say is not take those comparator numbers out of context. Egypt and South Africa are both very industrialized economies in terms of the output. So these are relatively diversified industrialized economies in terms of manufacturing output, in terms of significant industrial output, and it's very important for Nigeria to get there. I mean, it is that industrialization that creates the demand for electricity at the levels that you are talking about. For our economy that is not as industrialized, that is still 90% of exports are still essentially oil and gas, and they're not sort of coming from industrial activity, productive industrial activity within the economy. You will struggle to have similar levels of demand. All of that being said, obviously the levels of energy supply in Nigeria are this small. Need to move dramatically. As I said, I do think that taking a state-by-state level organizational approach is more likely to produce positive outcomes.
Okay. Well, Mr. Fagbule, this is not on the list, but let me just ask you this, because the challenge of infrastructure to a number of people would be not just providing it, but maintaining it. So what do we need to ensure sustainability or maintenance of those infrastructure? If you can answer that in about 30 seconds or to 1 minute. Because, I mean, look at the Co Bridge, Carter Bridge, and the rest of them. They've been there for decades. And it's only now that we are giving it attention. So no matter how good this infrastructure are, if we do not have not just the infrastructure to maintain the infrastructure, but a plan to it, perhaps that would be a challenge. What do you see as a gap that needs to be filled quickly in terms of maintenance of this infrastructure?
No, you're absolutely right? So it's a systemic problem in terms of the design of these projects has to go beyond simply having a project. The project has to work, right? You have so many cases of work in the first place. So the project has to work, and then it has to be able to pay for itself. It has to be able to be maintained, and that needs to be factored into the project concept right from the start. And that's definitely an area of improvement across economic infrastructure, also social infrastructure in Nigeria that we have to contend with.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Fagbule, Deputy Director, Head of Financial Advisory Services, Africa Finance Corporation. I would have asked you if you individuals can come and take loan, but please don't answer that one. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Truly appreciate the enlightenment you've given us.
Thank you, sir.
All right. So that's that. Up next is a focus on Showmax after this break. Just stay with us.